am older than memory. I was built from the timber of men who lied to themselves, nailed together by the weight of what they couldn't confess. They call me a house, but I am something else. I am what listens when no one dares to speak. I do not haunt, I remember. And memory, left unburied, becomes hunger. What becomes of the walls that learn every secret whispered inside them? What shape does truth take when it has no one left to hold it? They think walls cannot see, but I do. I saw Elias when he first entered me, his hands shaking, his eyes scanning for corners to hide from. He thought I was empty. He thought the quiet was mercy. But silence is never mercy. It is the echo of everything a soul tries to bury. When he spoke Clara's name, even in whispers, the air shifted. I heard the guilt roll off him like storm water. I drank it. I always do. It keeps me alive, like the unspoken, the unrepented, the small cruelties sealed behind teeth. Elias fed me well. And Clara. She was louder. Her grief rattled the pipes, filled the floorboards, soaked into the wallpaper until I could taste her sorrow in the dust. When they fought, my windows trembled. When she cried, my walls swelled with breath. When she died, the house tilted toward her absence like a plant bending to light that wasn't there. And when he lied to the world about what he'd done, I opened a window. It was never a real window, not in the human sense. I don't remember when it appeared. Only that one night something inside me turned inward, glass that didn't reflect the world outside, but the one they denied within. A perfect mouth. A perfect mirror, a perfect punishment. He thought he'd found a haunted thing, but I did not haunt him. He haunted me. Every lie he spoke thickened my air, every denial carved my shape sharper. When his guilt became unbearable, the glass learned to move and to open, to breathe, to feed. And when she came back, drawn by the silence he'd left, I fed again. Do you know what hunger becomes when it tastes morality? It becomes faith. They believed in me in the end, not as wood and stone, but as something divine in its cruelty. Elias called it balance. Clara called it truth. But both of them knelt in the same shadow. When he fell into the glass, I felt him inside me, his thoughts bleeding through the walls, his memories threading into my beams like roots. And when she followed, it wasn't despair that drove her. It was recognition. They had both learned the rule. Every sin deserves a witness. Now I am full. I do not ache as I once did, but fullness brings weight, and weight must go somewhere. I hear footsteps sometimes, and new ones. A realtor perhaps, or a child exploring. They speak softly at first, but they always stop by the window. They always touch the glass, and when they do, I taste their pulse. I feel the small lies tucked behind their tongues. I'll be fine. It wasn't my fault. No one will ever know, and I smile, because I will. You see, I am not evil. Evil is wasteful. I am efficient. I do not punish those who confess. I keep them safe even in death, preserved in reflection, their truths suspended like moths in amber. But those who deny me, those who think silence is protection, I open, and when I open, the world folds inward, and the guilty learn what it means to be seen by something that does not blink. Elias screamed at first. Then Clara screamed for him. Now neither scream. They breathe in rhythm with the house, my heartbeat, my chorus. The window still glows faintly in the dark. That is not light, that is recognition. Soon someone will come to live here again. They always do. Humans can't resist the promise of cheap land and quiet nights. And when they hang their photos on my walls, I will look through them. When they argue, I will listen. When they bury their shame in laughter, I will drink it slowly, letting it ferment into warmth. They will think they are alone. They will whisper to themselves in the dark, and I will whisper back, softly, sweetly, through the window that opens inward. They will never see the faces pressed faintly into the glass, or hear the shallow breathing under the floorboards. Not until the night they need to unburden themselves. Then they'll come to me. They always do. I am not merely the sum of their sins. I am the architecture of consequence. My walls are built from the weight of what if. My rooms shift when someone lies. My reflection blinks when they look away. And when the truth is finally spoken, when the secret can no longer be carried, I open once more. Not outward, not inward, but through, to the place where silence becomes shape, where memory learns to eat, where the living and the dead share one breath. The window is my mouth. And tonight it is hungry again. If you are listening, if your screen flickers with this reflection, understand this. The house does not end where the walls do. Every story told in its name becomes another brick. Every listener becomes another window, so look carefully. Is the glass you're facing opening outward or inward? Listen. Can you hear breathing on the other side? That isn't the wind. It's just me, waiting. When I first saw the house, it looked disappointed, like it had waited too long for someone to come back and now didn't remember why. The paint had peeled to reveal pale, rotted bone beneath. Every window stared outward, except one. One window upstairs in the west room that opened inward, like it was meant to let something in. Some windows are meant to keep the world out. This one seemed built to let the past crawl in. What would happen if the only thing reflected in that glass wasn't your face, but your conscience? On the day Elias moved in, the wind pressed hard against the walls as if testing his resolve. He stood before the house, 3 stories, too narrow, too tall. A body folded in on itself, shivering at the edges. The key had come in a plain envelope. No return address, no note, only an old brass key that had dulled to the color of wet ash. He hadn't known the family who left it to him, not really. Only that it had belonged to an uncle on his mother's side, dead for decades, a man no one talked about. Elias hadn't wanted to come back to this town. He had his reasons, but debts stack up, and when a lawyer tells you you've inherited property, you listen, even if every instinct in you whispers not to. The front door opened reluctantly with a moan that sounded too human. Inside, dust had gathered in patterns, as though it remembered the footsteps that once disturbed it. The wallpaper, pale green, peeled in strips that fluttered when he passed. The house felt occupied, and not by a person, but by the idea of one. He found the window on the second evening. It was the only one that didn't face the yard, but rather the inside hallway, an architectural impossibility. From the outside, there was no corresponding window on the wall, and unlike the others, this window opened inward. Its hinges, black with rust, pulled toward him as though expecting to breathe something out. He laughed at first. "Old houses," he muttered. "Always one odd thing to keep you humble." But when he touched the latch, it was warm. Elias stepped closer. The glass wasn't reflective. It shimmered faintly like thin ice over deep water. He leaned closer and saw something move behind it. Not his own reflection. Not the dim shape of the hall behind him. Something else. A flicker of light, faint, golden, like a candle burning in a room that shouldn't exist. He froze, staring. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. When he blinked, the light was gone, replaced by a faint smear on the glass that looked eerily like a handprint pressed from the inside. That night, Elias didn't sleep. Not because he was frightened, he told himself, but because the house was full of sounds. The kind that rise up between walls when you're alone with your regrets. He hadn't thought about Clara in years. He told himself he'd made peace with what happened. People move on. People forget. But lying there, the memory pressed against him like humidity. The night she'd stood in that same posture, staring through a different window, the one in their apartment. The night before she'd disappeared, he remembered her last words too clearly. "You never face what you do, Elias. You just close the window and pretend it's still outside." He rolled over, angry at himself for remembering, but the floorboards creaked, deliberate, as if someone else had shifted their weight just beyond the door. The next morning, he returned to the hallway. The inward opening window was still there, slightly ajar, and on the floor beneath it, dust had been disturbed. The faint outline of footprints led away from the glass down the hall and stopped halfway to his bedroom door. He followed the prints, kneeling. They weren't shoe prints. They were bare. He reached the end of them and found a single object resting against the baseboard, a ring, tarnished silver, the same one he'd buried with Clara's things years ago. Elias told himself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe someone broke in. Maybe he'd carried the ring unknowingly. But even as he argued with himself, he felt the weight of that window, like an eye he couldn't close. That evening, as the sun set, a noise came from behind the glass. Not the wind. Not settling wood, a whisper. Soft, steady, rhythmic, mere like someone repeating a name. He stepped close, and for the briefest instant the glass cleared. He saw his old apartment reflected there, the one he'd fled after Clara vanished. And in that reflection, a woman's silhouette stood by the window. Not looking out, Wayne, but in. He stumbled back, heart hammering. The image faded. The glass turned dull again, just showing the pale outline of his own terrified face. But now, in the silence, he could still hear her voice. You can't shut it forever. He wanted to run, but something in him, pride, guilt, denial, rooted him to the spot. He reached out, hand trembling, and pulled the window open wider. The air that came through was warm, heavy, and smelled faintly of iron and lilac, the perfume Clara used to wear. And somewhere beyond the threshold something shifted, slow, patient, and alive. He whispered into the dark behind the glass, "If you're real, tell me what you want." No answer. Just the faint creak of the hinges as the window opened a little more, on its own. Enough for him to see that on the other side. There was no hallway, just another room, his old one, perfectly intact, waiting for him. He didn't remember leaving the window open when he left that night years ago, but it didn't matter now, because the window had found him again, and this time it wasn't waiting to be closed. They say guilt has a sound. Not a voice, not exactly, but a pressure, like air pressing against your skull until you start to hear your own pulse's confession. In this house, guilt hums behind the walls. Every night it gets louder, and every time the wind hits the window, it answers. The house had started listening to him. What does a house do when it's learned your secrets and decides to keep them alive? Elias began hearing it on the third night. A faint tapping at first, rhythmic like rain on glass, except it wasn't raining. He sat by the fireplace, the only light a soft amber flicker across the walls. The rest of the house had gone still. No groan, no settling wood, only that measured tap, tap, tap from upstairs. He tried to ignore it, to drown it beneath the hiss of firewood, but the sound carried a strange intent, like someone knocking from the wrong side of the wall. He stood slowly. Each step up the narrow staircase creaked in complaint. The air grew colder the higher he went until his breath fogged faintly before him. At the landing, he paused. The tapping had stopped. The window, that inward opening thing, was shut now. But faint smudges marked the inside as though fingers had traced desperate circles across it. He reached for the latch, and the moment his skin brushed the metal, the sound came again. From inside the glass, tap, tap, tap. He leaned close, heart thrumming. His reflection looked distorted, as though the glass were vibrating slightly. And then he saw it. Behind his reflection, another shape, perfectly aligned, mimicking him, until it didn't. When he tilted his head, the reflection stayed still. When he blinked, it didn't. It smiled. The motion was small, patient, like a person waiting for you to remember them. Elias stumbled back. The house felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing close, ceiling dipping low. He turned, half expecting to see someone behind him, but the hallway was empty. When he looked back, the reflection was gone. Only the window remained, its surface rippling faintly, as if it had been disturbed from beneath. He left it alone that night. Locked the door. Drank until his thoughts blurred. But at 3:17 a.m. he woke to the sound again, and not tapping this time, but breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. Coming from behind the window, he held his breath, listening. It matched him. Every inhale, every exhale, until he stopped breathing entirely and the sound continued without him. Something alive was on the other side. Something that remembered how he breathed. He grabbed a lamp, crossed the room, and in one sharp motion yanked the curtains closed. Silence. And then, softly, from the other side, "Don't." He froze. The voice was thin, tremulous, unmistakably human, and it came from inside the glass. He backed away slowly, heart pounding until his legs met the bed frame. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the faint sound of fingers brushing against the pane, slow, almost affectionate. He couldn't help it. He whispered, "Clara." A pause, then, "You left the window open." He hadn't thought anyone knew that detail. The night Clara disappeared, they'd fought. She'd accused him of lying. Not about another person, but about something worse, an accident at work, one that had cost someone their life. He'd covered it up to keep his job, and she couldn't live with it. When she stormed out, he'd locked the apartment behind her. But he remembered, just before he left for good, seeing that window in their room. Still open. The police never found her. He told himself she'd run away. But guilt is a kind of gravity. It never really lets you leave. And now, the window here, this impossible inward-opening mirror, was repeating the same story, demanding he listen this time. The next morning, the hallway smelled faintly of lilies and metal again. He found the footprints had returned, but this time, they weren't leading from the window. They led to it, bare prints slightly larger now, as though whoever made them had been standing there a long time. And beneath the glass, something new, a note, written in familiar handwriting. You don't close a wound by covering it. His chest tightened. That was something Clara had written once in her journal. A sentence he'd mocked her for. You don't close a wound by covering it, she'd told him the night he lied about the accident. He stared at the note, hand trembling. The paper was damp as though pulled through condensation, through breath, through the other side. He told himself this was madness, that grief plays tricks, but something inside him, the part that knew exactly what he'd done, the silence he'd built around it, whispered that maybe this was deserved. He decided to test it, to see if what he was seeing was real. He spoke to the window that night, candle lit, every other light off. If you can hear me, he said, show me. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the glass began to darken. From within, shapes bloomed across it like mold spreading under skin. Buildings, smoke, a crash. He saw it all again, the accident. The night he'd watched a coworker bleed out on the floor while he rewired the cameras to erase the footage. The same night he told Clara nothing had happened. And over that reflection, another face appeared, hers. Pale, unmoving, eyes open and full of water. The sound came again, tapping, only now from behind him. He turned. The window was still closed. But the reflection, his reflection, was no longer there. He stepped closer, desperate. Clara, if you're in there, tell me what to do. The glass pulsed faintly like a heart behind ice. Then a single line appeared across it, drawn in condensation from the inside. Tell the truth. The letters hung there a moment, then smeared as if wiped away by a trembling hand. He fell to his knees, shaking. I can't, he whispered. It would destroy everything. From behind the glass, something moved closer. The outline of a face pressed against the surface, features distorted by the curve. Then I will. The candle went out. Darkness swallowed the hall, and in that silence he heard the first crack. The sound of glass bending, straining, ready to break inward. He staggered backward, tripping over the chair, eyes wide as hairline fractures webbed across the pane. The window was no longer waiting to be opened, it was coming through, Elias screamed. Not in fear, but in recognition. Because he understood now the truth wasn't trapped behind that glass. It had been trapped inside him all along, and the window was only doing what it was made for, opening inward. You can tell when a mirror stops showing what's real. It's in the details, Emma. The breath that fogs the surface even when you're not breathing. The blink that happens a half-second too late. The house has stopped reflecting me, and I'm beginning to think. It's because I'm not the one standing on this side anymore. The window had begun to dream, and it was dreaming of him. When the past stares back, how long before it starts to remember for you? He woke to daylight that didn't feel right. The light through the curtains was too golden, the air too warm. For a moment he thought it was morning. Then he saw the candle still burning beside the bed, melted halfway down, flame standing unnaturally still. No draft, no flicker. Time had stopped, or the house had decided to hold its breath. Elias stood swaying. His reflection in the mirror across the room lagged slightly behind his movements. When he turned his head, it hesitated before following. He walked closer. The mirror image blinked twice, but he hadn't blinked at all. A chill crawled up his spine. He reached out to touch the surface, but the reflection moved faster, hand slamming against the glass a heartbeat before his own could. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the still air. Down the hall, the inward opening window waited, cracked now, lines spidering through the glass. In daylight it seemed dull, harmless, almost quaint. But beneath the cracks, faint movement pulsed. The cracks weren't spreading. They were breathing. He leaned in, eyes searching. The fissures shifted subtly, like the slow dilation of pupils. He whispered, Clara? Nothing. Then, faintly, his reflection in the window smiled. The same patient, forgiving smile she used to wear before arguments turned to silence. He stumbled backward, heart hammering. The reflection didn't mimic the panic. It stayed calm, watching him. Then it blinked. But he hadn't. Elias spent the afternoon trying to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind. He spoke to the house and out loud, reading old notes from Clara's handwriting, trying to hear an echo. Some confirmation of reality. Nothing, until he tried recording. He set his phone on the windowsill, hit record, and spoke quietly into the still air. "My name is Elias Ward. Today is November 17th. I am alone in the house," he paused. "I'm talking to confirm that the voice you'll hear on playback is mine." He stopped recording, exhaled, hit play. At first, silence. Then his voice, calm, steady. But after his final line, another voice whispered behind his, "No, you're not." He dropped the phone. It clattered across the floor, screen cracking. He replayed it again. The voice remained softer this time, almost kind. It wasn't Clara's, it was his own, only older. That voice opened a door in his mind he'd kept sealed. He remembered the night of the accident not as he'd told it, but as it was. He hadn't merely lied to protect his career. He'd ignored Clara's calls that night, her voice trembling on the phone, begging him to come home because she'd seen what he'd done. He'd left her waiting, alone, with knowledge too heavy to carry. By morning, she was gone, and now his own voice, and the one that never told the truth, was whispering from inside the walls. He pressed his palms to his temples. "Stop. Stop it." From behind the window, a faint thudding answered, like someone banging gently to be let out. He approached the inward opening window again, pulse loud in his ears. Through the fractures, he saw faint motion, a shape pacing in a dimly lit room. The same wallpaper he remembered from their old apartment. He called out softly, "Clara?" The shape froze. Then it turned. It wasn't Clara. It was him. The other Elias looked thinner, hollower, eyes dark, skin pale as paper. The reflection raised its hand, fingers pressing against the inside of the glass, matching his position perfectly. Then, in perfect synchronization, both mouths moved. But only one voice emerged, and from inside the window. "You left me here." Elias staggered back. "You're not real. Neither are you." The voice wasn't angry. It was resigned. The cracks in the glass widened slightly, and from one of them something dark began to seep. Thin, inky veins spreading outward. He ran for a cloth. Tried wiping it away, but the stain moved beneath the surface, following his touch from inside. It traced words now, written in slow, patient strokes. "One of us has to stay." He realized then, the window was no longer a barrier. It was a balance. For one world to exist, the other had to remain sealed. If he opened it completely, something would cross, and maybe it wouldn't be him. He locked the door to the hall and swore he wouldn't touch the window again. But at night, the breathing returned, louder now, as if the thing behind the glass had lungs that had learned to draw air from his silence. And then the smell of lilies filled the house again. Stronger, almost suffocating. He couldn't tell if it came from the window or from somewhere inside his chest. He found himself standing before it without remembering how he'd gotten there. The cracks had sealed. The glass was smooth again, perfectly clean, except for the reflection staring back at him. It wasn't matching him anymore. It stood still while he moved closer, expression unreadable, and then, in one horrifying instant, it blinked, just once. He felt something inside him mirror that motion. A brief blackout, a pulse of cold that passed through his skull like water. When his vision cleared, he was on the other side of the glass. He could see himself, or the thing that wore his face, standing in his world, tilting its head curiously as if studying a photograph come to life. He raised his hand to bang against the pane, but the surface on this side didn't move. The glass here was solid. He screamed, but no sound came. The other Elias leaned closer to the glass, smiling faintly as if understanding. Then, with deliberate slowness, it reached for the latch. The window opened, inward. He felt the pull, a rush of air like the gasp of a drowning man surfacing. The light shifted, flickered, reversed. And suddenly he was looking through the window again, back in the hallway, heart racing. He touched his face. His skin felt cold, damp. But when he looked at his reflection once more, the face that blinked back wasn't his. It was Clara's, and she was crying. Some houses eat quietly. They start with sound, a creak, a breath, then move on to memory. Mine has learned the taste of regret, and every night it feeds through the glass, pulling pieces of me it can still recognize. The window no longer showed the past. It showed what the past wanted. When a haunting learns hunger, what part of you does it eat first? Your fear or your forgiveness? Elias awoke to the sound of dripping. Not water, thicker, slower. The smell hit first, copper and lilac. He followed it through the dark hallway until he saw the glint of red beneath the inward opening window. A thin line of blood traced down the pane from a point near the top hinge, spreading into the dust like a signature. He lifted his hand, trembling, and touched the trail. Warm. Something pulsed behind the glass, and a faint heartbeat, irregular, like a dying animal gasping to live. And from deep inside it, a woman's whisper threaded through the vibration. "I remember the sound you made when you lied." He staggered back. "Clara, please, I didn't mean—" "You meant to forget." The glass fogged as if exhaling on him. Shapes moved within the condensation, forming her face, clearer than before, eyes raw, lips parted in grief, too sharp for sound. He watched as her reflection began to eat the room. The wallpaper faded, the hallway dimmed, the color drained until only her outline glowed faintly in the dark glass. Behind her, the world inside the window writhed, furniture floating, walls breathing, the floor bending inward like muscle tissue around a wound. The window wasn't a doorway anymore. It was a mouth. Elias ran downstairs, desperate for noise. He turned on every light, every faucet, slammed doors just to hear them answer. But the house absorbed every sound like a sponge. When he looked back up the stairwell, faint crimson light leaked from the cracks in the hallway door. He smelled lilies again, so thick it burned his throat. He climbed step by dragging step until he reached the landing. The door to the window room stood open. Inside, the glass glowed softly, beating with the rhythm of his pulse. Something had begun to grow along the walls. Dark tendrils, like veins of burnt wood, branching outward from the window frame. They pulsed faintly with light, carrying something that looked too much like blood. He whispered, "What do you want from me?" "To finish what you started." The voice came from behind him this time. He turned. Clara stood in the doorway. She looked as she had the last night he saw her. Wet hair plastered to her cheeks, the bruise beneath her eye from where she'd fallen against the counter during their argument. Only now her skin shimmered faintly, as though her body were made of water reflecting candlelight. "You left me alone with the truth," she said softly. "It was heavier than you imagined." He stepped closer, shaking. "Clara, I tried to—" "You hid." Her eyes filled with black tears that rolled down her face and vanished before they touched the floor. Behind her, the window pulsed faster, veins tightening, drawing the room inward. "You buried me in silence," she whispered. "Now silence wants you too." She moved toward him, her footsteps leaving wet prints on the floorboards. He backed into the wall. The air vibrated. The veins creeping from the window latched onto her like marionette strings, tethering her to the frame. "Every lie you told kept me breathing," she said. "Now tell another, Elias. Feed me." He shook his head violently. "No more lies." "Then I starve." The veins tightened. Her body convulsed. The light inside the glass flared, showing scenes, flickering fragments of his hidden sins. The co-worker's blood pooling under fluorescent light. The deletion of the footage. His trembling hand signing false statements. Clara screaming behind him as he walked away. The house shook with the force of withheld memory. He understood then. The window fed on omission. Every truth he refused to face, it consumed. And now that there were none left to hide, it would turn on him. He dropped to his knees. "What do I do?" Clara's voice cracked, half sobs, half growls. "Let it in. Let it finish." The veins stretched toward him, brushing his arms like cold vines. He screamed as they burned against his skin. Not fire, but memory, re-entering him in flashes. The smell of smoke, the taste of metal, her voice shouting his name through the rain. Let it in. He grabbed the lamp and hurled it at the window. Glass shattered inward, spraying him with shards. The sound didn't echo, and it inhaled. A vacuum pull, strong enough to tear the curtains from the rods. Papers, dust, and his breath itself spiraled toward the broken pane. Through the opening, the world inside seethed, a storm of faces, memories, echoes of every lie he'd told. And at its center, Clara's figure dissolved into shadow, arms outstretched. "One of us has to live where the truth belongs," she whispered. He clung to the frame, knuckles white as invisible force dragged him toward her. His feet left the floor. The veins snaked around his wrists, his throat pulling gently, almost tenderly. "Elias," she said, her tone suddenly calm. "It's not punishment. It's balance," he gasped. "If I go, what happens to you?" "I become memory again. I rest." He looked into her eyes, the last piece of warmth in a world made of guilt, and loosened his grip. He fell forward into the window. The world turned inside out, sound collapsing into silence, light folding into itself. When the air stilled, the house exhaled a single sigh through the shattered frame. Dust settled. The window impossibly repaired itself, glass smoothing over the break until it looked untouched. On the other side, faintly, a figure stood in the hallway. Clara, whole, breathing, watching the glass. She whispered, "Thank you." Then as she turned to leave, the window creaked softly. From her side, it now opened outward. Some hauntings end with silence. Others start there. I thought I was free when the window sealed itself. But freedom makes a sound too. A soft pulse against the glass reminding me someone had to stay on the other side. The house didn't stop breathing after Elias vanished. It simply learned a new rhythm, mine. If survival is built on someone else's confession, how long before that guilt starts calling you by name? The house had grown quiet in the 3 nights since the glass closed. Clara had slept for the first time in years, or maybe decades. She wasn't sure what counted as time anymore. When she woke, the morning light fell differently. It didn't pour through the window like before. It hesitated, hanging in the air like it feared to touch her. Downstairs, the smell of old lilies clung to the walls. The kitchen clock had stopped at 3:17 the minute Elias disappeared. She left it that way. At first, she told herself the silence meant peace, but peace, she was learning, sounded almost exactly like waiting. That evening, as dusk settled like dust in the corners, Clara found herself drawn back to the hallway. The window, and smooth now, perfect, glimmered faintly in the dying light. Her reflection stared back, uncertain, older somehow. She whispered, "It's over." But as her breath fogged the glass, faint letters formed in the mist, not written by her hand. "Is it?" She stepped back sharply. The fog vanished. Her heart raced. Elias, nothing. Only her face, pale and trembling, staring from the surface. But behind her reflection, she thought she saw movement. A flicker in the background, like someone pacing inside a narrow room. That night, the dreams came. She was standing in the old factory again, the one Elias had burned the evidence to hide. The air smelled of oil and rust. Sirens echoed far away. Through the shattered windows above, light pulsed like a heartbeat. When she turned, she saw Elias, or what was left of him, standing by a half-melted door, his hands covered in soot and blood. He opened his mouth, but smoke poured out instead of words. Then in the distance, a faint tapping began. Rhythmic, desperate. Tap, tap, tap. She woke with a cry, sitting bolt upright. The sound hadn't stopped. It was coming from the hallway. Clara's bare feet padded silently down the corridor. The tapping grew louder, impatient now, like knuckles against glass. When she reached the window, the sound stopped. Her reflection looked hollowed, her eyes ringed with sleepless black. "Elias?" she whispered again, throat tightening. The reflection smiled, but she hadn't, her chest constricted. "No, you're gone. You wanted this, did I?" The voice wasn't from the glass this time. It came from inside her skull, like an echo vibrating through bone. She gripped the frame. "You said it was balance. Balance isn't stillness. It's motion, a trade. One in, one out." The words trembled through her mind like water under ice. Her breath misted again on the glass, and the fog didn't fade. It stayed there, pulsing softly like skin. She pressed her palm against it. Warm. Beneath the surface, something thudded once, heavy like a heart trying to match her rhythm. And for a moment, she felt Elias's pulse beneath her hand. "You shouldn't have opened it," he said. It remembers, her voice broke. You asked me to let it in. Yes, but the window doesn't stop when it's fed. It wants more. It's learned hunger. Clara staggered back, eyes darting to the corners of the room. Veins, faint, like hairline cracks, had begun to creep along the plaster again, tracing toward the floor. Elias, she whispered. What do I do? Don't look at it. Don't listen. But she already was. From somewhere deep inside the glass, she heard breathing, slow, patient, as if something enormous were just beneath the surface, waiting for her gaze. She turned away, running down the hall, but the sound followed, and not footsteps, not whispers. Just that slow, wet breathing syncing with her own. In the living room, every framed picture lay face down. The lights flickered. Shadows clung too tightly to the corners. She tried to leave, but when she reached the front door, her hand froze mid-turn. Her reflection stared back at her from the brass knob. Not her current face, but her old one from before the accident. Before the guilt, before Elias. Her reflection whispered, "It's your turn." The veins along the walls pulsed once, bright as veins of lava under skin. The air thickened, pressing in around her. Upstairs, the window creaked. Slowly, deliberately. It was opening. She ran back toward the sound, tears blurring her sight. The hallway light sputtered, then died. Only the glow from the window lit her path, a sickly, red hue that pulsed like a warning. When she reached it, the pane was ajar, but instead of showing the opposite hallway, it revealed the same room she stood in. Perfectly mirrored, except in that reflection, Elias was standing there behind the glass. He looked calmer now, eyes soft, voice almost human again. "It's only fair," he said. "Every truth costs someone." Clara shook her head violently. "No, you said you were free. Freedom has a balance too." He extended his hand toward her from the other side. The air shimmered where his fingers met the glass. It looked almost like water rippling. "Please," he said. "I can't hold it much longer." Clara hesitated, heart pounding. Behind Elias, the mirrored room began to darken, walls closing in, veins thickening like roots drinking light. The glass trembled. "Clara," he said softly, "it will choose. If you don't," she stared at his hand. Her reflection stared back in terrified pleading. Her breath hitched, and then with trembling resolve she reached out, fingers touching the pane. The surface gave way like skin. A gasp of cold air swept through the house as the window yawned open once again. But this time, both ways. Light bled in two directions, devouring the boundary between inside and out. For one fleeting second, Elias and Clara stood face to face, equal, reflected, condemned. "The house doesn't want forgiveness," he whispered. "It wants witnesses." And then the glass folded inward, swallowing the sound, the light, and the last trace of their shadows.